Hey, Stoney here. I'm here with Clinkley Wood, and this is Mechabellum Tournament. At the bottom here, we have Steel Sane playing as a surprise specialist, and he's up against Apucci playing as a giant specialist. And this is a 2000 plus MMR game, so very high level. Now, looking at the board here, we have Sledgehammer, Arc Lights with Marksman, Chaffless though, for Steel Sane, against a whole crap ton of chaff from Apucci. How do you feel about that, Clint?
Yeah, I think Chaffle starts are always a very interesting board state, right? But I think it's also a very solid read on what Steel Saint's probably going to be doing. Steel Saint's a very methodical player, likes to develop very slowly into a strong standard board. And I think, right, Apucci realizes that while he has great chaff clear in both the Sledgehammers and Arc Lights combined, we lack a little bit the single target DPS department, so we're gonna develop into some marksman. I think that's totally valid. And oh, I actually have it backwards. Yeah, no, I think Steel Saint is that that's his thought pattern. But Apucci developing a bunch of chaff early on, right, allows him to make a transition much smoother later on, right? We'll see Steel Saint probably develop chaff over the next couple rounds, while Apucci works on forwarding his board and probably dropping down some giants. How do you feel about giant spec in the current meta right now?
I still like it. I think it's still very strong. It gives you a lot of tempo in early rounds. And looking at this particular game, I mean, when your opponent starts with no chaff and you're a giant spec, there's really nothing stopping you from dropping like a round 2 fort, right? Because all you really have to deal with at most is 3 squads of chaff. And more likely than not, it's just going to be like 2 fans or something, which these 2 sledgehammers are more than equipped to handle.
And a great item coming up for Apucci here as giant spec in nano repair kit, but going instead for the haste module. Very interesting.
Very interesting. I would have gone with nano, right? I would have gone with nano, dropping a fortress, and then nothing this round could kill that fortress. But instead, it's going to be a Vulcan anticipating some sort of chaff, or is he playing into the meta?
No, he's playing into the meta. I was going to say, unless that's a Vulcan item, sure enough, we see a Vulcan get slammed by a Apucci, right? And this is sort of the idea that I was presenting earlier in the earlier rounds, right? Which is or rather in round 1, which is that Apucci has his chaff already developed, while Steel Saint has to spend this round doing that, and we can get ahead in putting down a giant or developing to something much stronger. So, for those that are not initiated right now, the meta is the Vulcan meta, somewhat reminiscent of the days of the boat meta, where people would just kill you with boats, and if you were behind, there wasn't much you could do. In this scenario, we can see this Vulcan just running down the left side.
It's still very strong. I mean, Vulcan got nerfed a couple times. Vulcan, the card, got nerfed as well, right? They no longer ask damage, but just the Vulcan alone, not even upgraded with anything, able to take on the entire army here.
And what gets really scary here, and what becomes pretty unmanageable, at least in my experience, is when one of these Vulcans hits level 2. And sure enough, right, this Vulcan on the left with this haste module is at about 80% of the way there. So it can get very out of control very fast. The other thing, right, is that in my experience, playing against this, the really only option is to try to get a read on it before it happens, and try to just out-aggro and out-tempo your opponent. There aren't many great options for Steel Saint to do it from this sort of positioning. We get an early level 3 Sabertooth, which can help with that, but Apucci develops very reasonably into Vulcan Phoenix, which is an old comp from yesteryear. How do you feel about Apucci's positioning here versus Steel Saint's?
I mean, it's pretty predictable at this point, right? He's going to get range at Phoenix at some point. There's going to be another Vulcan on the other side. The first tech is going to take, looking at this, primarily a medium-sized unit board, is probably going to be Scourge, followed by range in the next turn. Good pickup on a Sabertooth. I think that's going to provide a lot of meat at the front line. So I think Apucci is doing great. I think if he follows this trajectory in about 3 rounds, it's going to be very difficult to stop.
Absolutely. And the reality, right, is that once a player is ahead on the Vulcan, like this, right, we can just see that the chaff clear comparative to what Steel Sane has present in Arclights and Stormcallers just cannot keep up. And we have this level 3 Sabertooth and everything just running down the left side. And there it is, the level 2 Vulcan does show up in
Ooh,
the
got the saber
experience
too.
here. That was a sick little bit right there, yeah.
Yeah.
uh, but what I imagine here for this round, right, is a Vulcan being slammed down on the right side, the level coming in on the level 2 Vulcan, and then Scorch being clicked.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. And here's a response from Steel Say in the form of Melting Point. Now, the problem with Melting Point against Scorch Vulcan is that you're going to always have to worry about chaff clear, because Melting Points can't really kill chaff, while a Scorch Vulcan can kill everything.
Yep. Scorch Vulcan will kill everything, but Apucci goes instead for a tank production line. I think that's pretty. That's a pretty good idea, right? One, it's also pretty good in general against Stormcallers, but if Apucci feels like the read is Melting Point, then it's also just very good against that.
Tanks are notoriously great against Melting Point. I mean, Melting Point takes so long to charge up on a single unit. I mean, with smaller units, that's fine, but with tanks, it almost forces the Melting Point to charge up to its full power before it can kill it. And that's what, 4 to 5 seconds just for one puny tank. Yeah, it's totally worth the investment. All right, here it goes. Another Vulcan on the other side now with the tank production. And the board is looking very strong for Apucci right now. Now, how do you feel about Steel Sense board? Like, what would you do in this case? I mean, it's still early, right? He doesn't have 2 level 2 Vulcans, so what would you do to bring this back?
Sincerely, probably surrender. Go next. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I think there's a world, right, where like we desperately want like 2 to 4 more Stormcallers, and then maybe the board looks okay for us. But it's tough. It's really tough. The Melting Point gets a very favorable lock here, and this round looks like it might go for Steel Sane.
Yeah, so there's still time, right? Like there's no Scorch being played here, and Melting Point always have the EM in reserve if it ever needs the EM, right? So there's still a bit of time, and right now, Steel Sense Chaff Clear isn't half bad. He's got he's got a really strong Chaff Clear with 3 Arclights, 2 tanks, 2 Sledge Stormcallers. So I think he's definitely got a shot here.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the reality, right, is that Apucci can very easily develop like 2 more tanks, Master Recruit of Phoenix on the right side, click Scorch, and things get very hard once again for Steel Sane, but we'll have to see. Range tech coming out for both the Vulcan and the Phoenixes, and 2 more Phoenixes showing up behind what I imagine will be on the right side Vulcan. 1 attack, level 1 attack coming up from the tower for Apucci here. I think that's a very strong timing. I'm kind of a little worried that we haven't seen Scorch come out yet. Right, Apucci is under 2,000 HP, which means there is a strong possibility this round might be one of the last ones.
Well, no, I think this could go for a couple rounds. I think one of the reasons he took range is because he saw the Melting Point, and he knows range on Melting Point is just the most natural thing in the following round. And if you don't have range and you're forced to walk that extra 40 meters, then you're gonna have a really bad time. But I think Scorch is not far behind. I mean, I'm betting my money on the very next turn that button's gonna get clicked. This round is probably still going to go to Steel Sane, depending on how well this Melting Point does. But just look at that, like how much time is wasting on shooting at these sledgehammers. And if that's any indicator on why you should buy even more sledgehammers, maybe a second row of sledgehammers behind these Vulcans, I don't know what is.
Yep. I completely agree. I think Overlords is pretty great here. Steel Saint goes for the Rhino, but sells it. I actually think that's
Rhino
a bit of a
cash.
mistake. I think the Rhino with armor here really holds down these Vulcans for quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the few times that I'm able to reasonably handle these sort of Vulcan pushes or these Vulcan defensive sort of things is with a high level Rhino early on, right? Like a level 2 Rhino on round 2 really helps with that. But Steel Sand going for the Melter spam.
All right, it's going to be Melter and Crawlers. Crawler does reasonably well against late round Phoenixes, where the Vulcan are probably too busy focusing on the melting point themselves.
That's fair.
And I was going to say, like, at this point, like, what would you do with Asapucci, right? There's two ways you can do it. You can add more Vulcans or you can add more Phoenixes. And it looks like the answer is going to be more Vulcans now with Scorch.
Yeah, I think Scorch Vulcan is correct. Very interesting. I believe somewhat off meta. Usually we see charge shot, but launcher overload on Phoenix. I think this is like a solid read from Apucci, right? If you look at the board state, there's really only 2 marksmen that can rival, I guess, melting points, but that's a little bit, disingenuous. The marksmen really are there to basically duel the Phoenixes, and the Phoenixes are there to DPS those melting points down. So there's not much for Steel Saint to kind of deal with these Phoenixes once they get on target. And it's going to be basically a lot of damage coming out of these launcher overload Phoenixes. Look, we can already see that the arc light is down, and we are on these melting points.
Now, there is a danger of going launcher overload Phoenixes because of the range reduction. Because right now, these Phoenixes are at the exact same range as the Vulcans. So they're wide open to an attack by the marksman with air spec because they'll always prioritize air units if they're at the same range as a ground unit because of that extra 30 meter of prioritization.
Absolutely. In your attack spec coming out, if I'm Apucci, I'm windmill slamming this. What about you?
No, I won't even think twice about that. And he didn't go for it. He went for the smoke.
Interesting.
I don't know. I mean, at this level of play, I mean, what are the chances of Steel Saint not shielding this round? I mean, it is kind of expensive, right? You kind of have to commit 400 supplies of resources for a 150 supply of abilities, but come on. The smoke lasts 2 turns. I think it would be worth it.
Yeah, realistically, there might not be another round, right? So, I guess, I don't know, man. I feel like Steel Saint is such a spell-based player that it's a little unlikely that Steel Saint doesn't play around this, right? And we do see a couple shields coming out. So I just feel like maybe we're missing a little bit of extra damage in our carry units, which is our Vulcans, and not taking the senior attack specialist. I think that's like really key in here. But we're going for temp range. And getting a couple of levels on the Phoenixes. Who do you give this round to, just looking at the board state here?
It's tough, right? Because at the ground, I feel like these Vulcans are going to get disabled fairly quickly. As soon as the round starts, these 3 bubbles from Apucci are going to break because of the EM barrage from the melting points. And combined with the fire collars to go on these fans, there's going to be absolutely nothing in front of these Vulcans, which means the next EM barrage is going to land, disabling the Vulcans. So he's going to lose ground dominance. So it really just comes down to these Phoenixes, in which case right now we got 2 pairs of level 3 and 2 pairs of level 2. I don't know, it's hard to tell because maybe, I want to say maybe Apucci, but that's really just depending on how well these EM barrages land.
Yep.
Alright, the left side seems like it's getting right onto the Vulcan, it's getting through the Phoenixes. On the right side, though, it is falling, and these Phoenixes are coming in.
Oh, but a bad tower timing for Apucci here. And there is the EMP barrage hitting. What do you do in Apucci's shoes here?
Well, it depends, right? Because right now your Vulcans is only useful to get rid of the chaff. I don't think the Vulcan can last all the way to the end of the game, mostly because of the fire colors.
Yeah.
Unless if you okay, so there's a couple strategies. One is you want to make sure you have late arriving chaff and you want to make sure they actually survive. In which case you need lots of anti-missile, lots of late arriving fans in a row, and just to make sure they survive.
Mhm.
Another way to do it is to accept the fact that you're not going to have late arriving support, and instead you focus on early chaff clear, right? So I wouldn't, I mean, it might be a little expensive to actually, he doesn't run incendiary. I was going to say you could probably run incendiary, but just abandon the ground level because a Steel Sang has almost no anti-air with the exception of these melting points. So a round of 3 squads of wasps, late arriving wasp, all the way back against the wall to draw fire away from these melting points, allowing the high level phoenixes to do their damage with launcher overload, I think might be the better way to go.
I think that's super fair. And I think that's sort of the read from Steel Sane, right? We actually see Steel Sane develop 3 pairs of wasps, which I think personally don't do that well into launcher overload phoenixes, but I might be incorrect on that.
You're absolutely right.
But
I mean, I love to run launcher overload phoenixes in FFA games because they're essentially phoenixes that can clear out chaff.
yeah, absolutely. But aerial spec being clicked on the wasps, another steel ball or another production line tech being picked up from both players. Steel ball production being picked up on the Vulcan and added to the Vulcan, and then the middle melting point for Steel Sane. But this is a similar scenario, right, where like these melting points have to charge up for the full duration to kill something, and these Vulcans just look at it and it falls over.
Mm-hmm. Wow,
But
it's still very close.
Here.
Ooh. Is that going to be
Steel
exactly
Sane's
how
got it.
Oh my god. That tower timing with that splash from the Stormcaller, that is just so unfortunate.
And yeah, Poochie barely dies here. So it turns out there is some counterplay to what is going on here. What are your some takeaways here?
Well, I mean, one is that you always need to suppress the leveling on these Vulcans. You notice these Vulcans never went beyond level 2. Once they hit level 3, they can probably kill a squad of sledgehammers in under a second, which is really deadly. And level 2, point number 2 is outnumber the Vulcans with melting points. I think it's the same strategy when you're up against war factories with melting point, right? 1-on-1 is always super risky, but 2-on-1 though, that's a different story. I think Steel Sane manages chaff well, right? And he understands that for a board that's strong with chaff clear, he doesn't need as much chaff. A lot of time, you know, when we always talk to new players who say, okay, chaff is the most important thing, but we always forget to tell them the underlying principle of why that's an important thing. It's not that chaff is important, it's that you need to clear your opponent's chaff before they clear yours. That's important. And the easiest way to do that is to get more chaff. But sometimes more chaff clear achieves the same goal, and that's what Steel Sane understands here. Thank you for watching. If your break isn't over right this minute, you have to check out this video. I'll see you on the next one.
Prepare your tactics. Mechabellum's calling. Deploy your fortress. The battlefield's alive with swarms.